Hi, and welcome back to Purple Collar Life. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the 8 things that I did not know about mini excavators before buying my own. Now, obviously, I've watched a lot of videos in the past of content creators using their mini X's and a million things you can do with them, but there are some things that I don't think I realized when watching those videos. So this video is just to give a heads up to someone who hadn't thought of these 8 things when you're looking at a mini excavator. Let's talk about what I've learned in just over a month of owning this machine. Okay, now this first thing may be Takeuchi specific. It may even be Takeuchi TB235-2 specific. But the first thing I didn't know when I bought the mini excavator was how difficult the fuel fill would be. So you can see it does take a key to get that fuel door open. That's not a big deal. It's got a nice wide fuel fill here, which is really nice. And another thing I really like about this system is that there's a fuel gauge down here, so you know before you're getting overfilled in the machine. You know before you start spilling out. But what I don't like is that this is so recessed because of how the door has to close. This is a full 5-gallon can, and let me tell you what, you can pour the first 2 or 3 gallons pretty easily, but to tip it up, not because of the weight, but just because of the angle, the top of the fuel can hits here while the spigot's down in there, while the spout is down into the fuel fill. The top of the fuel can hits this so early on that you can never get that last 1 or 2 gallons of fuel to pour into the tank. This particular Mini X has a 12.2 gallon fuel tank. So when you're pouring fuel in here, it reminds me a little bit of the riddle on the movie Die Hard. You've got a 5-gallon fuel diesel tank, but you can only pour 2.5 gallons in. This is going to take 12.2 gallons of fuel to be full. How many different times you have to fill that tank up to get in here? So obviously there are going to be other solutions to this problem. I'm probably going to get a fuel transfer tank, fill it with diesel. That will help me not only fill up the tractor, but also the Mini X now. But in the past, that 5-gallon diesel tank has worked fine for filling up the tractor. I actually made a video in the past about 5 things I dislike about my John Deere tractor. The fuel fill was one of them because the fuel fill is in the center of the hood, which means you're leaning over that front-end loader bucket and oftentimes getting grease all over the front of you trying to fill up with diesel. This is going to be a different problem because not only would 5 gallons not be a whole lot to put in the tank at a time, but I can only get about 2.5 gallons of that gas can in at a time. The second thing that I didn't really realize until I had this machine is the power of this cylinder. This cylinder controls the curl of that bucket. And while this cylinder looks very similar to the other boom cylinders on the mini excavator, the nice thing is the motion here just creates this curl of the edge of this bucket, and that is amazingly powerful. So people, I've watched lots of videos where they say that the bucket is the strongest function on the Mini X, the ability to curl and grab and scoop things up. But until you own one, it's about impossible to actually visualize the power that the bucket has to curl within the ground. So if you put the teeth just on the edge of the ground and curl, this bucket will, without any hesitation, dig right down into the ground, an entire bucket full, just easily curl through whatever the earth is below it. At least right here in Northwest Pennsylvania, in the limited experience I've had, I was shocked at how powerful the curl function of the bucket is on this mini excavator. The next thing I didn't fully recognize when watching videos of other people running their Mini X. Now granted, this Mini X is practically brand new. These tracks are like brand new. They still have all the little lines on them. But this thing really digs into the yard. And I mean, when I watch Mike on Outdoors with the Morgans, I see him moving around with his Mini X, and I never notice in the background that there's any damage in his wood yard or in the yard that he's working in, but I notice it in my own yard when I'm moving around. I really rip the turf up when I'm moving with this machine. And like I mentioned in a previous video, and several of you commented that I wasn't doing anything wrong, it's just how these are, and the yard is easy to fix, which is good to know. But I hadn't realized that moving through the yard, even making nice wide turns, trying to keep both tracks moving and just slow one side down, will tear up the surface of the yard somewhat. The next point I want to talk about is value. The value of these machines, and I like to equate it when several years ago I was looking for a used Jeep Wrangler. I was talking to Jennifer and I said, you know, a Jeep Wrangler would be kind of fun. Let's see if we can find one for like $1,500 or $2,000. Just run it up and down the road to the Tasty Freeze. You know, you see a lot of people going to the Tasty Freeze in their Jeeps. Maybe take it down to the Bantam Jeep Festival. Well, it took me about 5 seconds of searching to realize that Jeeps really hold their value. Jeeps that are pretty worn can still demand a pretty high price, and Mini X's are somewhat the same way. I never realized until I was shopping for one that Mini X's really hold their value well. So you can usually find a new Mini X for a certain price, and then anything that is about 10 years old or less, still very close to that new price. You've got to get one that has, you know, 8,000 to 10,000 hours on it, and it looks like it has really been beat before you see a cheap price on a Mini X. So that was one of the things I learned, and certainly one of the decisions I made was I was not getting one of those completely worn out machines just to get a cheaper price. I would rather, and in my case, find one that was slightly used, a little bit of savings over the new cost, but I know I have a machine that's going to last me and work without problems for a long time. I always used to say the two best things that held their values were Jeep Wranglers and Toyota Tacomas. Now I think there's three: Jeeps, Toyota Tacomas, and mini excavators. Another thing I didn't realize until I bought this machine, and the previous owner, who's a friend of mine, actually recommended call your insurance company because it's a good idea to add insurance on the machine. So this machine being at the house means that it is this much more value added to our building or added to our homeowner's insurance. Now in our case, the total cost of that is about $150 a year. But I hadn't thought of that until my friend Dave told me, hey, you should probably call and get that thing specifically noted on your homeowner's insurance. They took the serial number in, they took all the information about it. So if something would happen to it, if it would get stolen or destroyed in a windstorm that blew the whole building over, this is specifically noted in our homeowner's insurance with its value so that it's covered by our insurance. Another thing to consider is if you're using a machine for work outside of your own property, it's probably a good idea to get some additional insurance so that you're covered if anything happens on somebody else's property. Another thing I didn't realize, now I know I watched a lot of videos with Outdoors with the Morgans and they used their Mini X a lot. In fact, in a recent video, Mike mentioned that he had put more hours on his Kubota Mini X than he had on his skid steer or his tractor. So he uses it the most of his pieces of equipment. What I didn't realize is that there are a million different things you can use the Mini X for. So I recognized all the things that the content creators I watch use their Mini X's for. What I didn't realize is that once I got it here on the property, I would constantly be making a list of the things that I need to get done now that I have the Mini X. I mentioned 3 or 4 projects I wanted to get done with it. Well, that list has significantly expanded, and I've got a laundry list now for the next several years of things I'm going to be doing with this machine. Next thing I wanted to mention is kind of a point, but more of a question. So as you know, I've only owned this Mini X for slightly over a month, and the last time I actually used it was about 2 weeks ago. I made that drainage ditch, the French drains around the shed. If you missed that video, I'll put a link to that one up above also. But so for the last 2 weeks, I've been traveling a ton for work, haven't really had a chance to use this thing, so it's been sitting here in the building under cover. Our temperatures have been cold, and I came out, this is a brand new battery. Previous owner put it on right before I bought the machine. Came out and it would not start. So like I said, this is probably a question more than a point, but the question is, if you leave these things sit for 2 weeks at a time, is it normal for the battery to go dead while operating the glow plug before you start the machine? So I turn the key, glow plug runs for an amount of time to warm up that starting process of the engine, but then after the glow plug has used that energy, when I turn the key, just clicks from the starter, not quite enough power left. You can see I do have it on the charger here. So we'll give it a try at the end of this video to see if several hours on the trickle charger made the difference and will allow this thing to start. Like I said, 2 weeks of not running it. So my question is, in the wintertime, am I going to have to come out here and start this thing up every day, every other day, every 3 days, just so that that battery doesn't go dead sitting still? Maybe these are designed to be run every single day, and maybe that explains why after 2 weeks of sitting in this cold and damp weather, the battery just couldn't maintain that charge it needed to run the glow plug and then start the machine. Now, I will say that the cab of this machine is very comfortable. You fold this down to get into position to run. The seat's got that nice air ride feel to it. The armrests are in the perfect position to run the 2 joysticks. You've got heat, you've got air conditioning, you've got a radio. Super comfortable. But I'll tell you, the first several times driving this thing, I was very uneasy, very uncomfortable, very nervous. Because this is the first track machine that I have ever owned, and the feeling is unlike anything else I've ever been on that I've been driving. You know, I was telling Jennifer the other night, the whole time growing up, I've not been nervous to operate any machinery. So when 3-wheelers first came out, I wasn't scared to get on them and ride around. When I got my first tractor, I wasn't scared to give it a try. I just never before had been nervous to run a machine. Nervousness hit me for the first time running a machine when I got our drone, and I noticed how scared I was operating the drone. Not because anything was going to happen to me, just because it's in my control, but also somewhat out of my control. It's way up in the sky. I can control it on my phone or on the joysticks of the control, but it just was that uneasy feeling like I can't quite control what's happening way up there 100 feet above my head. And even though drones aren't crazy super expensive, it was an investment I had made, and I obviously didn't want to break it or ruin it. Driving this is another kind of unique, nervous experience, at least for the first several times. The first thing I noticed about a track machine leaving the building here, and I actually added gravel in front of the building now to stop this from happening, or at least decrease the feeling or effect of it. But your tracks are completely flat, and when the ground goes a little bit downhill underneath them, what happens is you're driving along, you hit that pivot point where the weight balance shifts, and all of the track, all at once, the whole machine shifts down. So if you think about when you're driving a 4-wheeler or a side-by-side into this building, where there's a slope up to the cement pad, the back wheels go over, the front wheels go over, you never really feel anything other than the bump. But when you feel the shift of that whole solid plate of the tracks move the whole machine, like tilt you forward, that's a little bit of a jarring feeling. Now we're only thinking, 6-8 inches down that the front of the tracks are getting when we switch that balance point leaving this building. But it was a scary thing, and it made me nervous about going down over banks. So we don't have the flattest land here in Northwest Pennsylvania. A lot of our landscaping even includes some downhill. You're kind of flat across the yard and then a little bit of a downhill slope. And I've noticed you're going along that flat part of the yard, your tracks kind of stick over top of the slope a little bit, and then the machine tilts forward. That was the thing that I was totally not expecting, even after watching hours of videos about mini excavators, about driving them, about how to operate them, watching the content creators I enjoy using their mini excavators. I was not ready for that nervous feeling, and I added that gravel so that it's a little bit more level and a little bit less of an adjustment when it makes that pivot point of the weight going down over from the cement to the driveway. So there you go. Those are the 8 things that kind of surprised me a little bit, or I wasn't quite ready for, I hadn't thought about before owning my own mini excavator. Hopefully that information was helpful to you if you're considering buying one, or if you've just watched all these content creators for a long time like I have and never thought of any of those specific points. None of those are a showstopper. None of those would have kept me from buying this machine. It is so useful, and I really like it. We're actually going to be doing an entire review video of this machine once we get some more time in it. Those were just the 8 things that stood out to me, having owned this now for just over a month. Things that I really hadn't thought about before owning the machine. Now, let's see if that trickle charger has worked, and we were able to get enough battery power to start this up. Once I get it started, assuming it will start, we'll leave it running to get that battery fully charged. success. Just under a week ago, I did a video about mulching the leaves under this tree. I have done that 2 more times since. In fact, I did just about 3 hours ago. I did it this morning. You can see there's already some leaves falling to the ground there. But here's a little indicator of the fall so far. You can see the top leaves are mostly off the tree because those are the ones that change colors and fall first. The bottom leaves still have a little bit of greenish tint to them, but the leaves will fall from top to bottom out of this maple tree and hit the ground.